Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled, The Wellspring Legacy: The Flamekeeper's Journey. Illyra slipped out of her creaking attic room and stood at the edge of the old balcony, her fingers grazing the time-worn railing as a gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender and damp earth into the stillness of the night. Above her, a harvest moon hung low, its silver light spilling across the quiet village of Raven's Hollow. The world felt hushed, a deep, comforting silence that rose and fell like a slow, knowing breath, and Illyra closed her eyes to savor it. A soft voice, so faint it might have been her own imagination, drifted from the open window behind her. "You have arrived at the turning of the seasons, dear traveler," it whispered. It was the voice of her grandmother, Maribel, though Maribel had been gone these 5 years, her chair empty, her stories locked in memory. And yet, tonight, in this moment, the voice felt as real as the moonlight itself. Illyra drew a steadying breath. She had come to Raven's Hollow for reasons she scarcely understood, an invitation written in a tattered letter that spoke of ancient waters and destinies entwined. The letter had arrived unannounced, delivered by a raven that alighted on her windowsill and tapped its beak against the glass. Inside, the parchment, aged and fragrant with lavender oil, was signed only with a single cursive initial, M. Now, as she listened to the wind stirring through the pines and the distant song of crickets, Illyra could almost believe she had stepped into one of her grandmother's bedtime tales, a story of hidden realms and secret pathways, of water so pure it could heal wounds both of body and of spirit. And so, despite the knot of excitement and uncertainty in her chest, she felt an undeniable pull toward the adventure that lay beyond the edges of the familiar. Below, the lanterns along the cobblestone streets flickered like fireflies, revealing narrow lanes and ivy-draped cottages. A distant church bell tolled the hour, midnight. Raven's Hollow was asleep, save for the creatures of the night and pale-faced dreamers drifting between worlds. Illyra's heart stuttered with both trepidation and wonder. She slid the letter from the pocket of her coat and unfolded it under the moon's glow. "My dearest Illyra, you stand at the threshold of a journey you cannot yet imagine. When the moon is high and the world is at rest, follow the path to the Eastwood Falls. There, you will discover the mirror pool. Drink from its waters, and the truth of your heritage will reveal itself. Trust the stones that glow by moonlight, trust your instincts, and remember that you are never truly alone. M." Illyra's breath caught at the final words. Trust the stones that glow by moonlight. She traced her fingertip over the elegant flourish of the signature, her pulse quickening. Was this truly her grandmother's hand? Maribel had loved puzzles and riddles, each story woven with secrets for Illyra to decipher. It seemed only fitting that her final gift would be a location as mysterious as the woman herself. Closing her eyes, Illyra let the wind tug at her dark curls, lifting them like smoke in the night air. She pictured the rolling hills and dense pines of Eastwood Forest, a place she had visited only once as a child, trailing behind her grandmother as they foraged for mushrooms and whispered about woodland spirits. The memory shimmered on the edge of her mind, sun-dappled glades, the gurgle of hidden streams, and Maribel's laughter echoing through the trees. Under her breath, Illyra spoke out to the night. "I will find the mirror pool." A single star winked overhead, as if in answer. She turned and stepped back inside, guiding her slippered feet across the wooden floorboards toward her rucksack lying by the door. Its contents had been packed days in advance: a flask of herbal tea, a coil of silver thread, a slender knife with a carved antler hilt, and the precious letter itself. She added a folded wool blanket, a small lantern fueled with lavender oil, and a tattered map of Eastwood that Maribel had drawn for her, inked lines indicating a series of landmarks: the wolf's skull, arch, the moss-covered well, the whispering stones. That last detail made Illyra pause. Whispering stones. She recalled the curious pebbles her grandmother used to place along the windowsill, smooth river stones that seemed to hum softly whenever the moonlight struck them just so. Maribel said they carried messages from the forest, voices that guided wayfarers who knew how to listen. Illyra had never fully believed it, but tonight her doubts felt smaller, easier to set aside. She slung the rucksack over her shoulder, the weight comforting. In her hand, she held the lantern, its pale glow a beacon in the dark. With resolute steps, Illyra crossed the room, pausing only to glance at the portrait of her grandmother on the mantel. Maribel's kind eyes, forever rendered in oils, seemed to shimmer with life. Illyra pressed a finger to the frame, murmuring, "Guide me, grandmother." Then, with a soft click, she latched the front door behind her and stepped into the cool air. The world outside stretched before her like a whispering promise. She followed the narrow lane past shuttered shops and sleeping houses, her lantern casting long, wavering shadows on the cobbles. The scent of damp pine and wildflowers mingled with the distant chorus of frogs singing beneath star-studded heavens. At the edge of the village, the cobblestones gave way to a dirt path winding through whispering grasses. Illyra paused, recalling the letter's first clue: stones that glow by moonlight. She reached into her pocket and retrieved one of her grandmother's pebbles, an opalescent gem that, in the half-light, seemed to pulse ever so faintly. Placing it on a flat rock by the path, she watched as its surface glinted, revealing a silvery sheen that lighted the way forward. Heart-pounding, she pressed on. Each step carried her deeper into Eastwood Forest, where the trees stood sentinel like ancient guardians. Their branches arched overhead, forming a cathedral of leaves that filtered the moonlight into soft, dancing patterns on the forest floor. Here and there, lantern-lit lichen clung to bark, glowing like distant stars, and Illyra imagined the forest itself was alive, welcoming her with silent applause. She rounded a bend and found herself before the wolf's skull arch, a curved formation of gnarled roots and bleached bone that framed the path ahead. Beneath it, a shallow brook gurgled over mossy stones. Illyra knelt and dipped her lantern's flame close to the water's surface, watching her reflection ripple. The skull's empty eye sockets seemed to gaze down at her, as if assessing her readiness. Swallowing a gasp, Illyra rose and followed the brook upstream, guided by the hum of stones that lay scattered along the bank. Each time her lantern's light struck one, it shimmered softly, pointing the way deeper into shadowed woods. The forest closed around her until the world beyond was nothing but night and the gleaming points of her path. After what felt like hours, she emerged into a moonlit clearing. At its center stood a circle of standing stones, tall, flat slabs etched with ancient runes. The ground within the circle was carpeted with soft moss, and at its heart lay the mirror pool, a basin of water so still it reflected the sky perfectly, making it seem as though the heavens themselves rested in the earth. Illyra approached, each heartbeat echoing in her ears. The air here was impossibly still, save for the faintest whisper, as if the forest held its breath. She knelt by the pool's edge, bringing the flask of tea from her pack, but paused. The letter had told her to drink from its waters. Setting aside the flask, she cupped her hands and dipped them into the glassy surface. The water was cool, colder than any spring and clear as crystal. When she lifted her hands to her lips, the liquid glinted under the moonlight like liquid silver. She drank. The world seemed to tilt. A warmth bloomed in her chest, spreading outward until every nerve felt alight with memory. For a moment, she saw her grandmother's face, her laugh, and her stories weaving around her. Then she saw something new, visions of a lineage older than Raven's Hollow itself, of women and men standing by this very pool, whispering vows of protection, binding their fates to the land. Tears blurred Illyra's vision. She let the water fall from her fingers back into the pool, watching the ripples expand until the surface was perfectly still once more. A gentle wind stirred, carrying the scent of lavender and wild mint, and in that breath she heard her grandmother's final gift, the promise that she was never truly alone. Illyra rose, her heart full, and turned her gaze upward. The harvest moon shone bright, and the forest seemed to glow in response. In that moment, she knew her journey had only just begun. Beyond this clearing lay secrets and challenges untold, but she felt ready to face them. For within her now flowed the strength of those who had come before, and the wisdom of Maribel whispered in her ear, "Trust your instincts, and remember who you are." With one last look at the mirror pool, she stepped back into the circle of standing stones into destiny. Illyra stepped beyond the circle of standing stones, her senses alight with newfound purpose. The lantern's glow reflected off the ancient runes carved into each monolith, creating a subtle web of light that guided her back into the forest. Every rustle of leaves and distant call of an owl felt charged with intention, as if the woods themselves acknowledged her passage. She tucked the leather strap of her rucksack more securely over her shoulder and inhaled deeply, letting the cool night air settle into her lungs. Her footsteps were soft on the moss-carpeted ground, muffled by layers of pine needles and fallen leaves. The path she had taken to reach the mirror pool now lay behind her, but she trusted the course marked by the moonlit stones. Somewhere ahead, beyond the trees, waited the next clue, another fragment of her grandmother's carefully crafted puzzle. As she walked, recollections of the visions at the pool mingled with her determination. Faces of ancestors, their eyes bright with resolve, had shimmered on the water's surface. She remembered one particularly vivid image, a woman kneeling before a fire at the edge of a grove, her hands raised as though invoking something deep within the earth. The woman's lips had moved silently, whispering an incantation that Illyra could not hear, yet recognized as an echo of her own heartbeat. The first branches growing tight overhead signaled the entrance to a denser part of the forest. Here, the silver moonlight struggled to penetrate the canopy, leaving shadowed pockets where darkness pooled like liquid ink. Illyra tightened her grip on the lantern, its lavender-scented flame steady in her palm. She felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear, but from anticipation. After several minutes of winding through the trees, she reached a fork where two narrow tracks diverged. She paused, recalling the words on the back of her grandmother's map, "When the path forks at the twin oaks, listen for the song of stone." Sure enough, ahead of her stood two ancient oak trees, their trunks swollen and gnarled, branches intertwining like clasped hands. At their base lay a cluster of round, flat stones that pulsed faintly under the moonlight. Illyra knelt beside the stones and placed her palm on the largest one. A hum resonated through her fingertips, low and melodic, as though the rock itself were singing a lullaby. Closing her eyes, she let the vibrations flow up her arm, aligning with the rhythm of her breath. When she opened her eyes, the path between the oaks on the right glowed with a faint, silvery outline. Taking that as her sign, she rose and moved toward it. The trail led her deeper into the forest until the trees thinned and the undergrowth gave way to a small clearing. Here, the air was warmer, scented with the faint sweetness of night-blooming jasmine. In the center of the clearing stood a structure half swallowed by ivy and moss, a small stone pavilion whose pillars had crumbled long ago, leaving only their bases. A circular basin, once a fountain, lay at its heart, drained of water but etched with the same rune patterns as the mirror pool's standing stones. Illyra approached the basin and traced the runes with her finger. Each symbol felt alive, its edges glowing under her touch. She remembered the silver thread in her pack and gently tied a strand around one of the rune carvings. At her grandmother's encouragement, the thread was meant to bind her to places of power and signal her presence to the forest's hidden guardians. As soon as the strand settled into place, a breeze stirred the jasmine vines, and faint whispers drifted through the clearing. Illyra's heart fluttered. "I am here," she spoke softly, as if addressing the very spirits her grandmother had revered. The whispers coalesced into a single voice that spoke her name, Illyra. She turned, lantern held high, but saw no one. The voice sounded intimate, comforting, and carried with it the warmth of ancestral memory. "Yes," she answered, "I am here." The moment she spoke, the moon slid behind a wisp of cloud, and the night dimmed for an instant. When the moonlight returned, the basin in the pavilion had filled with water, glimmering like quicksilver. Illyra gasped, stepping closer to witness the transformation. The water's surface rippled silently, then stilled so completely that it once again became a perfect mirror. In its depths, she saw herself reflected back, young, determined, and now adorned with the silver thread coiled around her wrist. A ripple spread across the basin, and images emerged, a hidden cavern behind a waterfall, glowing faintly with bioluminescent moss, a key carved from white marble, resting on a ledge of jagged stone, and the silhouette of a stranger, tall, cloaked, with eyes that gleamed like amber lanterns. Illyra stood entranced, committing every detail to memory. Behind her, the forest stirred. She realized then that she had ventured far from the path she knew. To return to Raven's Hollow now would be to abandon the journey her grandmother had entrusted to her. A fierce resolve kindled in her chest. She needed to press on, to discover the cavern and retrieve the marble key, whatever it might unlock. Gathering her courage, Illyra cupped her hands and scooped a handful of the basin's water. She drank deeply, letting its coolness wash over her tongue and slide down her throat. Instantly, the world sharpened. She could hear the distant drip of water from far-off caves, the flutter of bat wings, and the steady pulse of her own heartbeat. The forest around her felt alive with possibility. Folding her sleeves, Illyra dipped a finger into the basin and pressed it to the rune of guidance, the symbol shaped like a twisting vine. The runes around the rim glowed, illuminating a narrow trail that sloped downward behind the pavilion. She exhaled, determination hardening into action. With lantern raised, she descended the faint embankment, following the softly glowing moss that marked her way. The path wound through ancient trees whose roots arched overhead, forming tunnels in the earth. Here and there, stone pillars half buried in loam bore fragments of graffiti left by travelers long gone, names and dates etched into the crumbling surface. She passed one pillar carved with the words "Seek the heart of the falls," and another that read, "Only the true of heart may pass." Each inscription confirmed she was on the right course. Eventually, the forest opened onto a steep incline. Illyra climbed carefully, her boots slipping occasionally on moss-covered stones. The air grew cooler and more humid, carrying with it the scent of rushing water. From somewhere above, she could hear the thundering pulse of a waterfall, its cadence both fierce and soothing. Illyra felt a thrill of excitement as she rounded a bend and glimpsed a ribbon of white water cascading down jagged cliffs. At the top of the incline, the trail flattened into a rocky ledge overlooking the waterfall. Mist sprayed her cheeks, cool and invigorating. Far below, a pool glowed with the same bioluminescent moss she had seen in the vision. Pale tendrils of green light wove across the water's surface like living veins. This had to be the cavern's entrance, a hidden archway behind the curtain of water. Illyra set her lantern on a flat stone, then drew the slender antler-hilted knife from her belt. With careful strokes, she carved a small notch in the rock beside the arch so that if she needed to find her way back, the mark would guide her. Then she breathed a silent prayer, wrapped her wool blanket around her shoulders, and crouched low beneath the falling water. The cold shock took her breath away as she stepped into the waterfall. The curtain of liquid pressed against her skin in icy sheets, but she focused on the glow beyond. The cave's mouth lay hidden in the shadows, and she ducked beneath the veil, letting the water flow over her until she slipped through into the darkness beyond. Immediately, the waterfall's roar faded to a distant thrum. She moved her lantern forward, its beam cutting a path through the damp gloom. The cavern walls glistened with green moss and reflected the lantern's light in thousands of tiny points. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth, and drops of water fell rhythmically onto irregular stone floors. Illyra walked slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile ecosystem. As she ventured deeper, she spotted the white marble key from her vision, perched on a natural pedestal of rock. Its surface was smooth and cool, carved into the shape of a twisting leaf. She approached reverently, raising her hand to touch the key, then hesitated because she sensed another presence. From the shadows ahead, a pair of amber eyes peered at her. Illyra froze, heart pounding. The stranger from her vision emerged, a tall figure draped in deep green robes that blended seamlessly with the cavern's mossy interior. In one hand, the stranger held a long staff carved from driftwood, its tip capped with a glowing crystal. "Who are you?" Illyra whispered, voice echoing. The stranger inclined their head, voice soft but resonant. "I am Soren, guardian of Eastwood's secrets. You carry the mark of the silver thread. Your grandmother called you heir of the Wellspring. Do you accept this role?" Illyra's breath caught. Her grandmother's words, her mother's legacy, all led to this moment. She nodded. "I accept." Soren stepped aside, gesturing toward the marble key. "Then take it. And know that with it comes both power and responsibility. The path ahead will test you, but you are not alone." Illyra reached forward, her fingers closing around the cool marble. As she lifted the key, the cavern lit up in a soft green glow, illuminating carvings on the wall that depicted women and men performing ceremonial rites around a stone altar. She realized the key would open something far greater than a locked door. It would unlock the next chapter of her destiny. Clutching the key, Illyra felt a surge of confidence. She had embarked on this quest to uncover her heritage, to honor her grandmother's legacy, and to protect Raven's Hollow from threats both old and new. With the key in hand and the guidance of the forest's guardians, she prepared to step deeper into the mystery that awaited her, determined to see her journey through no matter where it led. And so, through echoing halls of moss and shadow, Illyra pressed onward, the marble key warm against her palm, ready to unlock the secrets that lay hidden in the heart of Eastwood Forest. Illyra's footsteps echoed softly as she retraced her path through the bioluminescent cavern, the marble key clutched tightly in her hand. Even the rocks beneath her boots seemed to hum with ancient power, as though they recognized the key's rightful bearer. Soren, the guardian of Eastwood's secrets, followed silently a few paces behind, their staff's crystal tip sputtering its green glow across the wet walls. "You have done well," Soren said, voice low. "But our journey is far from over. The key you carry must unlock the Chamber of Whispers at the heart of Ravenshallow's ancient temple. There, truths buried by time await you." Illyra swallowed, her pulse quickening. "The Chamber of Whispers. I've never heard of it." She peered into the pool of green light, as if searching for answers in its shifting glow. Soren paused at the waterfall's mouth. "Few have. Even fewer have walked this path. But your grandmother knew its secrets, as do I. We must return to the surface and journey to the old temple ruins where the first settlers once knelt before a silent altar. There, the door lies hidden beneath ivy and stone. Once unlocked, the chamber will speak only to those who bear the bloodline of the Wellspring." Illyra's heart throbbed with a mix of excitement and fear. The scope of her quest was widening, first the mirror pool, then the hidden pavilion, and now an ancient temple within her own village. She glanced at the marble key, its twisting leaf design still cool under her fingers. It felt impossibly heavy, yet brimming with promise. They climbed out of the waterfall cavern one by one. Cold droplets cascaded down Illyra's hair and coat, but she ignored the chill, her focus fixed on what lay ahead. The tunnel's narrow mouth spat them back into the moonlit forest, where the trees appeared unchanged by their passage, silent sentinels standing guard. Illyra's lantern, now low on oil, flickered as she stepped onto familiar moss, and she realized she would have to conserve its light. "Follow me," Soren instructed, striding toward the main path. "We move quickly, before dawn breaks." Though the key's magic remains strong by daylight, the chamber's seal heals at sunrise. "We cannot risk missing the window." Illyra nodded, her senses sharpened by the urgency. Together, they threaded through the towering pines and oaks of Eastwood Forest. The forest floor, now damp with midnight dew, released a heady scent of pine resin and earth. Owls called overhead, and the distant howl of foxes carried on the cool breeze. With each step, Illyra felt the weight of her lineage settle comfortably on her shoulders. She was not simply fulfilling her grandmother's riddle, but continuing a legacy of guardianship. As they emerged from the forest, the pale glow of Raven's Hollow lay before them, a cluster of thatched roofs and cobblestone streets nestled against the rolling hills. Lanterns burned in cottage windows, and even at this hour a few late travelers lingered by the inn's door. Illyra's pulse quickened. The village she had known all her life now looked different, imbued with centuries of hidden history. Soren led her down winding lanes until they reached the edge of the village square. There, half shrouded by ivy and neglect, stood the crumbling facade of the old temple. Once, its steeple had reached toward the sky. Now, only rubble and archways remained, moss and vines reclaiming the stone. A rusted sign swung on a broken hinge, "Sanctuary of the Silver Wellspring." Illyra's breath caught. This was the place she had heard about in her grandmother's bedtime stories, a temple built by the first settlers in honor of the life-giving spring that had kept the village thriving through drought and disease. Legends spoke of a hidden chamber beneath the altar, where voices of the departed could be heard, offering counsel to those who knew how to listen. Soren turned to her and extended a gloved hand. "Place the marble key here," they said, pointing to a square indentation in the moss-covered stone lintel above the temple's entrance. The indentation matched the twisting leaf shape of the key perfectly. Illyra approached and fitted the key into the slot. A soft click rang out, echoing through the empty square. Ivy leaves trembled as if caught in a sudden breeze, though the air remained still. Then, with a grinding rumble, the stone lintel slid aside, revealing a narrow stairwell leading downward into darkness. "Illyra, your courage has led us this far," Soren said, voice echoing. "Now, you must go alone into the chamber. I will hold the passage and ensure no wandering spirit strays forth. Once inside, speak your name and claim what you seek. The chamber's voices will guide you further." Illyra nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She stepped forward, lantern held high, and descended the ancient steps. Each footfall stirred clouds of dust that rose and settled like ghostly mist. The air grew cooler, heavier with the weight of centuries. She reached the landing where a carved relief of her grandmother's initials M.S. was still faintly visible. Beyond lay a door of aged oak bound with tarnished silver bands. In the center, a silver handle bore the same twisting leaf motif as the key. Illyra exhaled, pressed her palm to the door, and turned the handle. It swung open with a creak that seemed to resonate from the depths of the earth itself. Inside, the chamber was circular, its walls lined with niches that held small urns of polished stone. Flickering sconces cast dancing shadows that made the room sway like the surface of water. At the chamber's center stood a stone altar carved with the Wellspring emblem, a cup spilling forth infinite droplets. Above it, an oculus in the ceiling revealed a perfect view of the moon. Illyra stepped forward and laid the marble key upon the altar. The moment she did, the door slammed shut behind her, plunging the room into a semi-darkness pierced only by the moonlight streaming from above. A hush fell, a silence so profound it felt alive. Then, as if stirred by her presence, the urns in the wall began to glow softly, each emitting a gentle hum. A chorus of whispered voices rose around her, overlapping in a tapestry of sound, voices of ancestors, villagers long gone, and her grandmother's unmistakable tone. Illyra, daughter of the Wellspring, speak, child, and we shall answer. Illyra closed her eyes and let the voices wash over her, steadying her resolve. She uncapped her lantern and placed it face down on the altar to preserve its faint magic, then she knelt, head bowed. I seek the truth of my heritage, she declared, voice trembling but clear. I seek the power to protect Raven's Hollow and honor the Wellspring legacy. Show me the way. The whispers crescendoed and then fell silent, leaving only her own breathing echoing in the chamber. A single beam of moonlight narrowed, illuminating a niche directly opposite the entrance. Illyra rose and approached it. Inside lay a slender scroll bound with silver wire and sealed with a drop of blue wax engraved with the Wellspring emblem. Her fingers trembling with anticipation, she unwrapped the seal and unfurled the parchment. The scroll contained a single passage written in flowing script. To the heir of the Wellspring. Beyond this chamber lies your greatest trial. Seek the lost spring at the forest's core, and restore the balance broken by shadow. Only then can the Wellspring's song endure. Below the inscription was a rough map of Eastwood Forest, marking a location even deeper into its heart, a place Illyra had never visited. A knot of excitement and dread twisted in her stomach. The lost spring, it sounded like the counterpart to the mirror pool, a source perhaps corrupted or hidden by dark forces. A sudden clatter at the chamber door snapped her attention back. Sauron's voice called through the wood, Illyra. The dawn's first light approaches. The temple seal is closing. You must leave. Illyra tucked the scroll into her pack, took a steadying breath, and dashed back to the door. She pushed with all her strength, and it yielded, swinging open to reveal Sauron waiting with their staff ablaze. You are ready, Sauron said, their ember eyes reflecting pride. But time is short. Follow the path marked on the scroll and trust in those before you. Raven's Hollow depends on you. Illyra nodded, hoisted her rucksack, and climbed the stairwell. The key and the scroll lay safe within her satchel, their combined weight an anchor of purpose. As she emerged into the cool night air once more, the first blush of dawn tinted the sky. She glanced back at the temple, its door sealing itself, the ancient magic humming with renewed vigor. Ahead lay her next quest, to journey to the forest's core, find the lost spring, and face whatever shadows had tainted its waters. With the marble key still warm in her hand and her grandmother's wisdom alive in her heart, Illyra set off down the moonlit path, determined to fulfill her destiny and protect the Wellspring song for generations to come. Illyra rose with the first pale fingers of dawn stretching across the sky, slinging her pack over one shoulder and checking that the marble key and the silver-sealed scroll lay safe within. The forest at daybreak was a different world from the moonlit realm she had traversed. Beams of golden light filtered through fresh green leaves, dappling the leaf-carpeted trail in shifting patterns. Birds sang tentatively, as if testing the crisp morning air. Illyra breathed in deeply, tasting both promise and tension on the breeze. She opened the scroll and consulted the rough map once more. The lost spring lay even deeper into the forest, at the convergence of three streams marked by a fallen statue of the Wellspring goddess. According to the map, this place would be reached by following the silver thread, a path of stones her grandmother had enchanted, now faintly visible by daylight. Illyra took careful steps off the main trail, her eyes scanning the mossy ground for pale stones. Within moments she found one, a smooth disc the size of her palm, etched with the tiny glyph of a twisting vine. She knelt and traced its edges, feeling a gentle thrum under her fingertips. This was the first of many markers leading her onward. Each one guided her away from the safety of the known paths, deeper into dense thickets and tangled undergrowth. As she pressed forward, the forest's mood shifted. The cheerful calls of wild thrushes fell silent, replaced by uneasy rustlings in shadowy hollows. Here and there she spotted small creatures, squirrels, hedgehogs huddled in corners, their eyes reflecting fear rather than curiosity. Illyra paused at a clearing where a family of deer stood motionless, nostrils flaring as they considered her passage. She offered them a gentle nod, and they bounded away as one, dissolving into the underbrush. Unease coiled in her belly. Something was wrong with this part of Eastwood Forest. The air felt heavy, scented with rot and sorrow. Branches overhead drooped under a film of slimy moss, leaves mottled with brown and curling at the edges. Illyra's lantern, though battered by the day's journey, still carried a wisp of lavender-scented flame. She lit it and let its glow push back the gloom, its soft scent a small comfort against the tang of decay. A sudden low growl snapped her attention to a thicket ahead where two animals, half-wolf, half-shadow, prowled restlessly. Their eyes glowed faintly red, and their fur trailed wisps of darkness like living smoke. Illyra's heart hammered. These were creatures of shadow, born of corrupted magic. She gripped her antler-hilt knife, remembering her grandmother's warning, only the truest heart can face what once was pure but now is twisted. The pair lunged, jaws snapping, but before they could close, Soren stepped into view, staff raised. "Stand back." they called, and a shock of green light burst from the crystal atop their staff, slicing through the mist and sending the shadow wolves recoiling with pained howls. Illyra exhaled, relief flooding her. Soren beckoned her onward. The corruption has seeped from the lost spring. You must cleanse it, Illyra, before we can restore the balance. With Soren's protection, they moved past the snarling remnants until they found a path forked at the root of a massive oak, its trunk scarred by claw-like rifts that oozed dark sap. More stones lay embedded here, though many were fractured or overgrown. Illyra knelt and applied the silver thread from her pack to the largest shard, whispering a prayer taught by her grandmother. The thread glowed softly, sealing the crack and mending the glyph. Immediately, a trembling vibrato ran through the wood, and the sap stilled. It breathes easier, Illyra murmured, standing and brushing her palms on her trousers. Each stone you heal brings you one step closer, Soren said. But you must hurry, the darkness grows. They continued along a narrow ravine carpeted in soft ferns. The sound of trickling water grew stronger until at last they stood before three converging streams, clear ribbons of water that mingled at a rocky basin. There, half buried in moss, lay the fallen statue described in the scroll, the Wellspring goddess, her face serene despite a deep crack running through her chest. Illyra approached and laid the marble key against the statue's breast. The key pulsed in her hand, as though recognizing its counterpart. She pressed it firmly into the crack, and a radiant warmth spread from the point of contact, filling the clearing with pale white light. The stream stilled, and the basin before her shimmered, revealing the lost spring's waters, now blackened with corruption. She knelt and drew her flask from her pack, the same vessel she had once filled with herbal tea, now empty. Illyra dipped it into the inky pool and watched as the water swirled with oily tendrils. Soren stood guard, staff held at the ready, their gaze sweeping the shadows. Illyra closed her eyes and chanted the words passed down in her family, a simple invocation of cleansing, invoking the Wellspring's original blessing. The black water writhed as if alive, then, with a forceful swirl, it cleared. Tiny motes of silver light rose from the depths, coalescing into floating orbs that drifted upward like fireflies. The basin transformed, its surfaces reflecting the sky above once again. A hush fell over the glade. The gentle song of returning birds filled the air. Illyra exhaled, her arms trembling. She had done it, she had cleansed the lost spring. Soren stepped forward, their staff's green glow dimming in deference to the newly restored waters. The balance is restored, thanks to you. But there is one final task. Illyra looked up, confusion mingling with exhaustion. One final task. Soren nodded toward the statue. The goddess's eyes, once dull stone, now gleamed with living light. She must be returned to her rightful place, to remind Raven's Hollow of its guardianship. Only then will the Wellspring song endure. Illyra studied the statue. It was heavy, too large for her to carry alone. She set aside her pack and bent to inspect the surrounding stones. A series of low pedestals ringed the basin. Perhaps here, she whispered, pointing to the largest. Following her gesture, Soren and Illyra worked together, leveraging vines and branches to roll the statue upright onto its base. The goddess settled into place with a final hiss of settling stone. A beam of midday sun broke through the canopy, striking the goddess's face. Light radiated outward, illuminating the entire clearing. The stones at Illyra's feet glowed with renewed glyphs, each one now bright and intact. The lost spring gurgled with life, its waters clear and humming with magic. Tears pricked Illyra's eyes. It's beautiful. Soren placed a hand on her shoulder. Raven's Hollow will know peace once more, thanks to your courage and heart. Illyra smiled, the weight of her quest lifting. She had faced moonlit puzzles, cavernous trials, and shadow wolves. She had cleansed a tainted spring and awakened an ancient guardian. Yet in her chest beat excitement for the next adventure, the stories still unwritten, the heritage still unfolding. Together, they left the glade, the restored statue standing sentinel behind them, and followed the trail back toward home. Behind them, Eastwood Forest sighed in contentment, its balance restored for now. And Illyra, heir to the Wellspring, walked with the knowledge that her grandmother's legacy lived on through her footsteps. By the time Illyra and Soren returned to Raven's Hollow, the sun had already dipped toward the western hills, casting long shadows over the village's ivy-cloaked roofs and cobbled streets. The air was warm and golden, filled with the scent of blooming elderflowers and the soft rustle of banners swaying above the square. But something was different, palpable. As if the very earth had taken a deep breath, relieved of a centuries-old burden. The village pulsed with a kind of quiet joy. Illyra paused as they passed beneath the old stone arch at the village entrance. Her boots crunched softly against gravel dusted with flower petals, white, pale blue, lavender. It wasn't a coincidence. They know, she whispered, glancing at Soren. The guardian nodded slowly. The forest speaks. Its healing is felt by all who are tied to it, even if they do not know why. The village square was alive with activity. The baker, a round woman named Fenna, was placing fresh loaves and sugared pastries on a long wooden table beneath the well house roof. Children ran barefoot in the golden light, their hands stained with berry juice and chalk. Bunting strung between buildings fluttered as villagers gathered around a tall figure who stood near the old stone fountain at the heart of the square. It was Alden, the village elder, stoop-backed but sharp-eyed, his silver hair tied with a ribbon of green. He raised his hands for silence. "Today we give thanks," he declared, his voice cracking like a dry twig but strong nonetheless. The water flows clear again. The trees no longer whisper of fear. And the dreams of our children are no longer clouded by shadows. A soft murmur of agreement swept the crowd. Illyra and Soren stepped forward, and all eyes turned. A hush fell. "Illyra," Alden said, wonder softening his words. "You went into the forest, didn't you?" "I did," she replied, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I followed the path of the silver thread. I found a mirror pool. I entered the Chamber of Whispers. And with the help of Soren, I found a lost spring. We've restored it? A collective gasp rippled through the villagers, followed by reverent silence. Then a woman's voice called out, "She's her grandmother's child." Another voice echoed, "Maribel lives on in her." Illyra felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to such praise. She had always thought of herself as the listener, the wanderer, someone who observed the stories, not starred in them. And yet, here she was, the girl who had followed a letter from a raven's beak and unlocked a legacy hidden in stone. Alden gestured to the old fountain. "Then it is fitting that tonight we begin the Wellspring festival anew." Soren leaned close and whispered, "Your grandmother started the festival, you know. In secret, at first. A quiet ritual of light and water, meant to keep the balance even as others forgot." Illyra's breath caught. She stepped up beside Alden and reached into her satchel. From within, she drew a small crystal vial, clear water from the newly cleansed lost spring. She uncorked it and poured the contents into the fountain's basin. The moment the water touched the stone, a soft hum filled the air. The basin glowed with a silvery light, and the old fountain groaned to life, water bubbling up from hidden pipes. Gasps of awe turned into cheers. The children clapped. Someone began to sing a melody simple and old, passed down for generations. Illyra didn't know the words, but she recognized the tune. Her grandmother had hummed it while stirring tea, while brushing Illyra's hair, while tying herbs in bundles on rainy days. That night, the village came alive. Torches were lit in circles around the square. Tables groaned with food, stewed roots and wild greens, honeyed nuts, baked trout from the stream. Musicians played fiddles and flutes while dancers spun in loose, joyful patterns beneath the stars. Illyra stood slightly apart at first, near the edge of the festivities. Her mind buzzed with everything that had happened, and everything still to come. The scroll mentioned nothing beyond the lost spring, but deep down, she knew the journey was not over. The shadow she had seen twisting the forest had not been rootless. Darkness never came uninvited. Soren approached, holding 2 cups of spiced cider. They handed one to Illyra. "You look as if you're still walking through the woods." "I suppose I am," she admitted. "It's hard to come back from something like that. I feel changed. Like, something woke up inside me, and now it won't go back to sleep." Soren nodded. "That is the mark of a guardian." Illyra sipped the cider, its heat grounding her. "Was it like this for you?" Soren didn't answer at first. They watched the villagers dance, their face unreadable in the firelight. Finally, they said, "I walked the path of the thread long ago. I didn't have guidance. I made mistakes. But I found the forest's voice, and when I did, it became my compass. You have something more powerful, the legacy of memory, the bloodline of the Wellspring." Illyra thought of the urns in the chamber, the voices of her ancestors echoing in a song only she could hear. She closed her eyes and let the music of the festival wash over her. The hum of the fountain, the laughter, the clinking of mugs and bowls. All of it was a lullaby for the village, a reminder of the ancient pact between land and people. "Thank you," she said to Soren. "For everything." Soren smiled, rare and soft. "The forest thanks you, too." Later that night, long after the last ember of the fire had faded and the children had been tucked into bed, Illyra found herself alone beneath the old tree at the edge of the village. She sat with her back against its gnarled trunk, watching the stars blink open above the treetops. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the scroll one more time. The words were unchanged, but something shimmered beneath them, as if a second message lay hidden in the ink. She held the scroll to the starlight, and faint lines revealed themselves, an invisible map, etched in silver. This one led not to a spring or a statue, but to a mountain far to the east, where the stars converged above a temple lost to time. Illyra's heart skipped. A new journey. A new riddle. She wasn't surprised. A breeze stirred the branches above her. Somewhere in the rustling leaves, she heard a whisper. The wellspring endures, but so does the storm. She folded the scroll carefully and placed it back in her pack. Rising to her feet, she looked eastward, toward the dark silhouette of distant peaks. This was only the beginning. With the moon high above and the forest sighing in sleep, Illyra turned back toward the village square. Her lantern hung at her side, glowing faintly, as she walked beneath the arch and rejoined the circle of stories, guardian of the wellspring, and bearer of its song. Illyra stood at the edge of the village the next morning, where the cobbled streets of Raven's Hollow surrendered to the wild, open land beyond. Her fingers brushed the worn leather strap of her satchel, the familiar weight of the scroll pressing against her side. Behind her, the last embers of the Wellspring Festival smoldered in fire pits and in memories. Before her, the road to the forgotten peak stretched out like a silent challenge, cloaked in early mist and mystery. The hidden map she had uncovered on the scroll, the one visible only under starlight, showed a narrow trail veering eastward, far beyond the borders of any map the villagers possessed. It traced a path through craggy hills, then twisted sharply toward a lone mountain ridge known in old stories as the Spire of Morning. The name alone sent a chill down her spine, but it also stirred a pull deep within her bones. She had known, even before the ink revealed its secret, that her journey was not yet done. Soren waited for her at the trailhead, their green cloak already dusted with dew. They said nothing as Illyra approached, only offered a quiet nod. Strapped to their back was a new staff, freshly carved from silverwood and tipped with a shard of quartz that shimmered like trapped dawnlight. "You're certain this is where the scroll leads?" Soren asked, voice quiet. "Yes," Illyra replied. "And more than that, I feel it calling. Like the mirror pool did, like the chamber." She paused, then added, "But this is different. Darker, maybe. Older." Soren's brow furrowed. "The Spire of Morning hasn't been visited in generations." The stories say it was sealed after the last war of the Wellspring. Some say a piece of the Wellspring's power was hidden there, locked away so it couldn't be misused. Then we need to find it before someone else does, Illyra said, adjusting her satchel. They set off in silence, their boots crunching softly against the damp gravel. The trail quickly narrowed, hedged on either side by brambles and ghost fern. By mid-morning, the sun broke through the clouds and cast shimmering light across the hills, painting the grass in hues of gold and green. Birds called overhead, but the forest ahead was silent. By noon, they reached the ridge. Illyra felt her chest tighten as the landscape changed. The trees thinned, gnarled and stunted by the wind, and the grass turned to stone. A hush blanketed the terrain. Even the breeze, so lively that morning, fell still. The path before them spiraled along the side of the mountain, a ledge barely wide enough for two people. Jagged rock walls rose on one side, a sheer drop yawned on the other. In the far distance, the spire of morning loomed taller than she expected, black stone veined with red mineral lines, like blood frozen in obsidian. Soren broke the silence. This place resists life. Can you feel it? Illyra nodded. The air grew heavy the closer they drew to the peak, thick with static and sorrow. A tension pulsed beneath her boots deep, ancient, like the earth itself remembered something terrible. As they neared the base of the spire, Illyra saw ruins scattered across the mountain's foot. Crumbled stone columns jutted from the earth like broken teeth. Moss clung to forgotten doorways, and ancient symbols' Wellspring runes were barely legible on the fallen stones. They came upon a massive stone gate half buried in the cliffside. At its center, a shallow indentation glowed faintly, shaped like a leaf twisted in a spiral. Illyra stepped forward. Without a word, she withdrew the marble key from her satchel and placed it gently into the stone. At once, the rock vibrated, dust falling from its surface. A low rumble echoed through the mountainside, and the gate began to part, revealing a cavern entrance that breathed a cold wind and exhaled the scent of iron and wet stone. Soren held up their staff. We don't know what waits beyond. Are you ready? I have to be, Illyra replied. They stepped inside together. The chamber beyond was vast and hollow, like stepping into the ribcage of a slumbering giant. Pillars of ancient stone lined the walls, each etched with symbols she barely recognized. In the center of the space lay a circular dais. Floating above it was a sphere of dark crystal, pulsing faintly with inner light. But they were not alone. A figure emerged from the far shadows, tall, cloaked in deep red, their face obscured by a veil of ash-gray silk. They did not speak, only raised a hand toward the sphere. Soren stepped protectively in front of Illyra. Who are you? The figure spoke, voice echoing strangely. I am the Watcher of the Bound Flame. This place is not yours. Illyra stepped forward. This place belongs to the Wellspring. I carry its legacy. The figure tilted their head. Then you carry its curse. Without warning, the crystal pulsed violently. The ground shook, and a wave of energy burst from the dais, throwing Illyra back against the wall. She gasped, the wind knocked from her lungs. Shadows poured from the cracks in the stone, taking shape, twisting, malformed things with too many limbs and eyes that burned like coals. Soren slammed their staff into the ground, sending a shockwave of green light through the chamber. The creatures shrieked and recoiled. Illyra struggled to her feet, fumbling for the scroll. She unrolled it quickly. There, hidden in the edge of the invisible ink, were words she hadn't seen before. Speak the name of the first flame, and the dark shall part. Her mind raced. The first flame. Her grandmother's stories, there had been a name once. She squeezed her eyes shut, reaching back through memory, through lullabies, and whispered tales. Then it came, quiet as breath. Velora, she whispered. The moment the name passed her lips, the air cracked open with a blinding surge of white gold light. The sphere shrieked, its dark energy evaporating in a single burst. The shadows screamed and withered, crawling back into the cracks from which they had emerged. The watchers staggered, the ash-gray veil slipping from their face, revealing not a monster, but a woman no older than Illyra, her eyes haunted and hollow. She collapsed, whispering, "You remembered." Soren knelt beside her, offering gentle words, but Illyra's attention was fixed on the sphere. Where once it pulsed with shadow, now it glowed with the soft light of a flame, gentle, enduring. She approached it slowly and reached out. The moment her hand touched the crystal, a warmth flooded her palm, and a single ember flickered into her chest, settling behind her heart. She knew then, the wellspring was not just water and healing, it was fire too. Creation. Destruction. Renewal. She turned to Soren. This was never just about restoring balance. It was about remembering what we are. Soren nodded. And guarding it. Together, they left the chamber, the watcher in tow, the sphere pulsing softly behind them. Outside, the wind had returned, stirring the mountain trees. As they descended, Illyra looked back one last time. The forgotten peak stood tall against the sky, but no longer mourned. It had remembered its purpose. The journey back from the forgotten peak was steeped in silence. The weight of what Illyra had witnessed, the dark sphere, the watcher, the name of the first flame, clung to her like a second skin. She kept one hand near her chest, where the ember had settled. Though invisible to others, she could feel its presence pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat echoing beneath her ribs. Soren walked beside her, quiet as ever, their expression unreadable beneath the hood of their cloak. The watcher, whose name they had learned was Seren, walked a few steps behind, head lowered, bound by no rope, only the fragile thread of her own exhaustion. She had not spoken since the mountain's light washed away the shadows. They made camp that night at the edge of a pine grove, where the forest softened into gentle hills. A stream bubbled nearby, and the scent of moss and wood smoke filled the air. Soren lit a small fire while Illyra sat beside it, staring into the flames. The ember in her chest hummed in response, feeding on the fire's warmth like a seed waking beneath soil. "What is this thing inside me?" she asked at last, breaking the silence. Soren looked up. "It's not a thing, Illyra. It's a memory. A piece of something ancient, older than the Wellspring. Older, even, than the village. The first flame isn't just a name. It's a spark passed from guardian to guardian. You've inherited it?" She pressed a hand to her heart. "It feels alive." "It is," Saren said, her voice hoarse but clear. "And it will test you. Just as it tested me." Illyra turned toward her. Saren sat with her knees drawn close, eyes reflecting the firelight like mirrors. Her face, though young, was lined with sorrow far beyond her years. "I failed," she said. "I was chosen to carry the flame once. I let it be consumed by fear, and the shadows took hold. That's why I became the Watcher. To guard what I could no longer use. To make sure no one else made the same mistake." Illyra studied her. "Why didn't you destroy the sphere?" "Because the flame cannot be destroyed. Only forgotten. Only hidden." Soren added quietly, "And now, it has chosen again." They all fell silent after that. Illyra's thoughts spiraled into the night. What was she meant to do with this power? What did it mean to carry fire in a world still healing from darkness? She looked to the stars, scattered above like pinholes in a curtain, and whispered the name again, Belora. The ember flared gently, and for a moment, she felt not fear but clarity. The next morning, they returned to Raven's Hollow. News of their return spread like wind through tall grass. The villagers gathered in clusters along the main road, faces alight with curiosity and unease. Illyra, Soren, and Saren stepped into the square, and Alden emerged from the crowd, leaning heavily on his cane. "You've gone to the spire," he said, eyes narrowing. "And returned?" Illyra met his gaze. "The darkness there is gone. The sphere is no longer a vessel of corruption. It's something else now. Something ancient and alive." Alden looked at Saren. "And her?" "She was the Watcher," Illyra said. "She protected it, even as it nearly consumed her." Saren stepped forward. "I know I can't undo what I allowed. But I want to help restore what was lost. If the village allows it." A murmur swept through the people, but Alden held up a hand. "The forest has changed. The waters have cleared. And we've all felt something shift. Perhaps that is enough proof." Later that day, Illyra stood alone at the mirror pool. The surface shimmered in the midday sun, as clear and still as glass. She knelt and dipped her fingers in, watching the ripples fan out. The ember responded again, stronger this time. Her reflection shimmered, and then a vision surfaced. A great storm over the forest. Trees bending, rivers overflowing. A stone tower crumbling in the distance. And at its center, a figure cloaked in white flame, her, holding a lantern whose fire burned like a sun. She gasped and pulled her hand back. Behind her, Soren approached quietly. "You saw it, didn't you?" "I saw what's coming," she said. "The storm. The tower." Soren nodded. "The flame shows not just what was, but what might be. A warning. A promise. You have time to prepare, but not forever." Illyra stood, water dripping from her fingers. "Then I need to learn how to use it. How to wield the flame." "You will," Soren said. "And not alone." Saren appeared at the edge of the clearing. "I can teach you the first rites. The flame dances to rhythm and will. But to master it, you'll need more than practice, you'll need purpose." Illyra felt the ember stir. The journey to the spire had changed her, but it was only the beginning. A greater challenge loomed, one that would test not only her strength but her soul. She looked to the horizon, where the forest gave way to distant mountains and unseen dangers. A storm was coming. But she was ready to face it with fire in her chest, and the Wellspring song in her veins. And so the girl who once followed a raven's letter stepped into her new role, not just as heir of a legacy, but as guardian of the flame that would guide the world through darkness once more. The days that followed passed in a rhythm both unfamiliar and strangely grounding. Illyra rose with the dawn, no longer as a mere traveler or curious dreamer, but as something more, something ancient made new. The ember of Velora pulsed softly in her chest, not demanding, but ever present, like the murmur of a sleeping giant. Saren had stayed in the village, though she kept to the edge of things, never quite inside the circle of daily life, but no longer outside it either. Each morning, she met Illyra in the glade beyond the old bakery, where the forest thinned and the stones still whispered beneath the roots. There, they trained. "Feel the rhythm beneath the surface," Saren said one morning, standing barefoot in the dew-slicked grass. "The flame is not a weapon. It's a memory. A song. You don't command it, you listen to it." Illyra frowned, her fingers extended over a line of stones etched with spiral runes. She had hoped that once the ember chose her, it would obey her. Instead, it resisted like a bird perched just out of reach, daring her to chase it. "I'm listening," she grumbled. "It just refuses to speak." Saren arched a brow. "Because you're asking it to perform. That's not what it wants. You must offer something first." Illyra exhaled slowly, closing her eyes. She let her thoughts settle, breathing in the cold morning air, feeling the ground beneath her bare feet. She let the pressure of the world go, the village, the prophecy, even her own expectations. And there it was, a flicker. Not a roar of flame, but a warmth. A thread winding through her fingers, soft as light and steady as breath. When she opened her eyes, the stones glowed faintly, and one of them lifted from the ground, hovering just above the grass before settling down gently again. She blinked. That was it. Saren smiled for the first time. That was the beginning. That night, Illyra returned to her room above the old bookshop, exhausted but alive in a way she'd never known. She sat by the window, watching the lanterns in the village square sway in the evening breeze. The scroll lay open beside her, its visible ink now accompanied by a growing constellation of silver runes that had begun to appear each night, as if the ember was writing back to its own story. One rune in particular had drawn her attention, a double spiral flanked by wings. She traced it gently. "What are you trying to tell me?" A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Alden. He entered without ceremony, leaning heavily on his cane but standing tall as ever. "You're needed," he said simply. Illyra followed him down into the square, where a group of villagers had gathered near the fountain. A young boy lay curled on the cobbles, his skin pale, eyes closed, breathing shallow. His mother clutched his hand, weeping softly. "What happened?" Illyra asked, kneeling beside him. "He wandered near the edge of the forest," the woman whispered. "Near the bramble fields. When he came back, he collapsed. He's been asleep since." Illyra felt a cold weight settle in her chest. The bramble fields. That was near the place where the mirror pool's magic had once grown weak, where the forest still bore old scars. She placed her fingers gently on the boy's forehead. The ember responded at once. A sickly presence clung to him like rot hidden beneath fresh leaves. It wasn't shadow exactly. It was something worse. "Something's growing," she said. "Not darkness, not corruption. But hunger. Like the land is still thirsty, even after the spring was healed." Alden stepped closer. "Can you do anything?" Illyra hesitated. Then she reached for the water in the fountain, water drawn from the restored mirror pool. She dipped her fingers into it and then touched them to the boy's chest. Her heart pounded as she focused inward, letting the ember rise. A single word formed in her mind. A name, even. Another guardian. Another flame. She whispered it, and her hand glowed faintly. The boy stirred. His lips moved. His eyelids fluttered. A moment later, he coughed and sat up, confused but awake. The crowd gasped. His mother broke into tears and pulled him close. Alden stared at Illyra as though seeing her for the first time. "You've changed," he said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. That night, As the village slept, Illyra stood alone once more at the mirror pool. She felt the water's rhythm echoing with her own, but it no longer soothed her. It spoke of imbalance. A deeper storm, one yet unseen. Soren joined her quietly. There's a shift. Do you feel it? Yes, she said. Healing the lost spring wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Something was sealed long ago and now it's stirring. Soren nodded. Then it's time. For what? Soren looked to the horizon, where the stars blurred into mist. For you to take the oath. Illyra frowned. What oath? Soren's voice came from behind them. The Flamekeeper's oath. To guard the ember. To wield its light not as fire, but as memory. Not to destroy, but to preserve. Illyra felt the ember flare at the words. She stood tall, her breath steady. Then tell me the words. The two guardians stood on either side of her beneath the open sky. Soren spoke first. Do you vow to carry the first flame, not as weapon, but as guide? I do. Soren followed. Do you vow to guard the balance, even when the world forgets? I do. Soren's voice softened. Do you vow to face the storm, not to defeat it, but to understand it so that what is lost may one day return? I do. The air shimmered. The stars brightened. And the ember within Illyra surged like a sunrise, flooding her limbs with light. A wind swept through the clearing, rustling the trees in a voice older than any of them. And somewhere far to the north, beyond the forest and the peaks, a door long sealed began to creak open. Illyra felt it. The night after the oath passed without dreams. Illyra awoke before the sun, sitting upright in her bed as if jolted by an unseen hand. Her skin tingled with the remnants of a presence that had brushed against her thoughts, cold, vast, and watching. She looked to the window, where the horizon was just beginning to fade from indigo to ash blue. The morning should have felt peaceful. It didn't. She rose and dressed quickly, the weight of the flame still pulsing in her chest like a distant drum beat. When she touched the scroll that lay folded on her desk, a new rune had appeared overnight, burnt into the parchment itself as though seared by fire. It was shaped like a closed eye wrapped in a broken circle. A warning. Outside, the village was stirring. Smoke rose from chimneys, carts creaked down cobbled paths, and birds trilled soft, hopeful songs. But beneath that, Illyra sensed the tension rippling under the surface like hairline cracks spreading across a mask. Something was shifting. Quietly, urgently. Soren met her beneath the bell tower. It's begun, they said without greeting. Last night, the northern lights stretched over the forest green and gold, but wrong. Too low. Too bright. The elders whispered of it in their sleep. It's the door, Illyra murmured. Soren nodded grimly. A door that should not open. They walked without speaking, making their way to the edge of the forest where Saren waited. She stood beside a standing stone Illyra hadn't noticed before, half covered in moss and leaning at an angle, as if something beneath the earth had shifted. It hummed faintly with the same tone as the stones Illyra had followed on her journey to the mirror pool. Only the sound was discordant, like a string pulled too tight. There's an entrance, Saren said, touching the stone. Far to the north, past the ash grove vale. Sealed by your grandmother. By me. By others who came before. We buried it in silence because the power behind it feeds on memory. On story. Illyra narrowed her eyes. You mean it eats the Wellspring's legacy? Saren nodded. And now, it remembers us. Saren unfurled a worn map. Upon it was a place Illyra had never noticed before, a blank patch in the far corner labeled simply, The Hollowing. No paths go there, Saren said. No birds fly above it. The forest avoids it. Illyra stared at the map, at the emptiness in that space. Then that's where we're going. They gathered supplies quickly. Saren prepared protective wards carved into flat river stones. Saren carried old binding silver thread soaked in lunar water. Illyra packed her grandmother's journal, the scroll, her antler hilt knife, and a flask of water drawn from the mirror pool itself. By midday, they left the village behind. Their path took them beyond all familiar trails. They crossed the Ash Grove Vale, once known for wildflowers and fireflies, now muted and still. Trees leaned away from their passage, and strange patterns etched themselves into bark, spirals and eyes and ancient runes whose meanings had long been lost. By dusk, they arrived at the edge of a great ravine. It split the earth like a wound, wide and jagged, its floor hidden in mist. Across the chasm lay a plateau of blackened stone, empty but for one thing, a towering obsidian gate flanked by ruined statues of headless guardians. The stone pulsed with the same red veining as the spire of morning, but here it bled with a deeper hunger. The Hollowing, Saren said, her voice barely audible. No one has stood here in 100 years. Illyra stepped forward. The flame in her chest recoiled, then surged with warning. Don't go. Go anyway. The pull was undeniable. She stepped closer and the air grew thick. Her thoughts tangled. Names escaped her. Her own grandmother's face blurred in her mind. She stumbled back with a gasp. Saren caught her. This is what it does. It erases. Slowly. Steals the truths we hold closest. We'll lose everything, Illyra whispered. Even ourselves. Not if we bind the flame, Saren said. The oath keeps the memories anchored. You still remember the mirror pool, yes. The lost spring. The chamber. Illyra nodded, breath unsteady. Yes, but they feel farther. Then we must act fast. Together, they crossed the rope bridge that stretched across the ravine. Every step creaked underfoot. Below, the mist churned like breath. On the other side, they approached the gate. The statues watched, though they had no faces. At the gate's center was an indentation, the same spiral leaf shape that matched the marble key. Illyra hesitated. This will open it, she said. And whatever waits behind it will wake, Saren added. The moment you turn the key. Saren placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to do this alone. I know, Illyra said. But it has to begin with me. She drew the marble key from her pouch and fit it into the stone. A rumble echoed through the ground. The gate pulsed, then parted. Beyond, a stair descended into darkness so deep it swallowed the lantern's glow. Illyra stepped forward, each breath echoing louder, the weight of generations pressing on her shoulders. The last thing she heard before crossing the threshold was Saren's whisper. Remember your name. And then the dark closed in. Illyra took her first step into the hollowing, and the air itself seemed to vanish. The moment the obsidian gate sealed behind them with a soundless thud, the world narrowed to only what the flame allowed her to feel. No wind. No warmth. No scent. No sound beyond the dull, rhythmic beat of her own heart, and even that felt borrowed, like it might be taken at any moment. The stairwell curved downward, each step carved into basalt and veined with crimson lines that pulsed faintly as if the stone itself still remembered fire. Saren walked behind her, their staff casting a faint halo of silver light. Saren followed, her expression distant, eyes scanning the walls like she expected them to speak. They descended in silence, the oppressive dark pressing in tighter with every step. After what felt like hours, the stairs leveled out, and the narrow corridor opened into a vast subterranean chamber wider than the village square, taller than the temple ruins, and utterly silent. At its center stood a black monolith rising from the floor like the spike of a buried tower. Around it coiled dozens, no, hundreds of roots, petrified and bleached, tangled like veins around a dying heart. Set into the stone around the room were archways, 12 in total, each leading into darkness, and each sealed by a different rune. Illyra stepped toward the monolith, the ember in her chest shivering against the overwhelming silence. A phrase from her grandmother's journal echoed in her mind. The hollowing is not a place. It is a forgetting. Is this it? She whispered. Is this what we came for? No, Saren said, her voice brittle. This is only the edge of it. Saren moved beside Illyra, holding the scroll aloft. The map glowed faintly, and from its surface, new lines began to form, converging paths, each arch marked with a rune. In the center, a new symbol blazed to life, the eye of unmaking. Saren pointed toward it. That is the true hollowing. That is where the forgetting begins. And where we must go. But the doors are sealed, Illyra said. What opens them? You do. Saren stepped toward the first arch. The rune above it looked familiar, one of the glyphs that had appeared in Illyra's dreams. As Saren placed her palm against it, the flame in Illyra's chest pulsed in answer. The rune flashed, then dissolved like ash in wind. The arch yawned open. A chill gust rushed out, thick with the scent of old parchment and rain-soaked stone. The corridor ahead glowed faintly with golden motes, floating like the dust of memories. This door leads to the first vault, Saren murmured. The vault of forgotten names. They stepped through together. Inside, the walls stretched endlessly in all directions, covered floor to ceiling with names etched into stone slabs, millions upon millions of names, some fresh and sharp, others weathered to near illegibility. The room pulsed faintly with sorrow, as though it mourned the weight of so many who had been lost to time. Illyra brushed her fingers against one of the names. Maeve Thornweaver. She didn't recognize it, but her fingers trembled as if the flame did. She was a Flamekeeper, Saren said. Centuries before us. They sealed her name here when the last storm came so that her story wouldn't be used against her. Used. Illyra frowned. Saren spoke quietly. The hollowing feeds on names, on stories. The more a memory is spoken, the more vulnerable it becomes. So those who knew too much, who carried the greatest truths, chose to hide themselves here. To protect what they carried. And now? Illyra asked. Saren met her eyes. Now, the hollowing remembers them again. As they walked deeper, the light began to shift. The motes faded. The names on the walls started to smear, the letters curling and warping. A pressure built in Illyra's head, like she was trying to remember a song she had never heard. Her steps faltered. I can't think, she gasped. I don't remember how we got here. Saren caught her arm. This is the hollowing's edge. The place where memory begins to decay. The flame is your anchor. Hold on to it. Illyra forced herself to breathe. She closed her eyes, placed her hand over her heart, and whispered, Mirror Pool. Lost Spring. Chamber of Whispers. The Spire. Velora. Each name steadied her. Each place reaffirmed her story. The flame responded, rising like dawn through her limbs. Around her, the smear on the wall slowed, paused, then reversed. Names re-etched themselves. The air cleared. Saren stepped forward, looking shaken. This power, it's reacting to you. To your will. It's reacting to my memory, Illyra corrected. That's what it's afraid of. Not fire. Not weapons. But remembrance. They reached the far side of the vault. Another sealed door stood there, bearing the eye of unmaking. But this one pulsed violently, resisting their presence. Illyra raised the scroll. The runes aligned into a message. Only one may pass. Only one may carry the fire forward. She turned to the others. It wants to divide us. Soren frowned. If you go alone, I won't forget you, she said. That's what it fears. I'll remember. Soren hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached into her satchel and removed a pendant silver, with a drop of mirror water inside. This was Maribel's, she said. Your grandmother gave it to me long ago. Said to give it back when the Hallowing returned. Illyra took the pendant, heart tightening. She stepped forward. The rune above the door flared, resisted, then broke apart as she held the pendant aloft. The door opened slowly, revealing a spiraling staircase of glass and light descending into shadow. She looked back one last time. Soren raised a hand. We'll be here when you return. Illyra nodded. With the flame burning bright, the pendant close to her chest, and the names of all who came before whispered on her lips, she stepped alone into the final descent. And the Hallowing began to whisper her name. The spiral staircase of the Hallowing seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth, each translucent step suspended in air, humming with a strange vibration as if it were made not from stone or glass, but from threads of memory spun tight. Illyra descended slowly, her fingers grazing the wall of woven light that coiled along the central pillar, its shimmer forming faces and places that vanished the moment she focused. Names whispered around her. Illyra, Thornweaver, Belora. Some she knew. Others she had never heard, and yet each stirred something deep within her, like doors rattling softly in long-forgotten halls of her mind. As she descended deeper, the ember within her pulsed more strongly. It didn't burn, it warmed, like a beacon calling her forward. And yet, she could feel the Hallowing watching. Testing. Waiting for her to forget something vital. She whispered to herself, softly and steadily. Mirror pool. The chamber of whispers. The lost spring. The spire. Belora. Soren. Soren. Over and over. Her lifeline. After what might have been hours or minutes time frayed in the Hallowing, Illyra reached the base. The staircase ended at a threshold made of black ironwood, carved with ancient glyphs in a language older than any scroll. The door stood ajar. She stepped through. The chamber beyond was massive, domed, and impossibly silent. The walls were lined with shelves, endless tiers of obsidian stone filled with books, scrolls, totems, vials, and locked boxes. It looked like a library, but none built by human hands. The architecture bent and curved in strange angles, impossible geometries that tugged at her mind like half-remembered dreams. In the center stood a pedestal. Atop it, a single book, bound in dark leather. Unmarked, but vibrating with a pressure that made her teeth ache. The hollow archive. She stepped closer. As her fingers neared the surface of the book, the light dimmed. A shadow coalesced behind the pedestal, forming the shape of a tall, robed figure. Unlike the watcher at the spire, this one had no face, only a hollow mask, black and featureless, with eyes that bled faint silver mist. "You have come far," the figure said, voice like wind over grave soil. "But you walk paths that should remain closed." Illyra steadied her breath. "I walk them because you're still whispering into the world. Still stealing names. Still feeding on the Wellspring's memory." The figure tilted its head. "We do not feed. We preserve. What the world forgets, we keep. You would let memory decay in the light." "No," she said. "I would let it live." She reached for the book. The figure's form flared, and a wave of cold surged through the chamber, slamming into her with the weight of centuries. The pendant at her neck, the one Saren gave her, glowed with sudden brilliance. The mist recoiled. "You carry her light," the figure hissed. "The one who sealed us. Maribel." She failed. "And so will you." Illyra opened the book. Immediately, the room erupted in flame, but it did not burn. It illuminated. Thousands of voices burst to life from the archive, names shouted, whispered, wept. She staggered back, but did not shut the book. She listened. Within those pages were the true memories of those lost to the hollowing Flamekeepers, guardians, villagers, songs, oaths. Things no one had spoken in generations. Names thought erased forever. She turned the pages. One by one, her mind filled with them. Maeve Thornweaver, first to carry the ember. Elias Wind, who tamed the wild flame. The severed grove, where the first flame was hidden. The 13th oath, broken and buried beneath the temple ruins. Every story returned was like fuel to her fire. The figure howled. "You awaken too much. There is a reason memory fades." "No," Illyra said. "There is a reason you wanted it forgotten." The flame surged. From the center of her chest, the ember expanded into a halo of light, blinding and gold, casting back the hollowing's mist. The archive trembled. Shelves cracked. Walls split, but instead of collapsing, they opened, letting beams of story pour forth like rivers made of song and starlight. And then, in the final pages of the book, she saw her own name. Illyra Wellsong. Not Thornweaver. Not simply a wanderer. Well song, a title passed down through generations, those who did not just carry the flame, but sang it back into the world. With the book still open, she looked up. The Hollowing's figure staggered. "You cannot hold it all," it said. "You are still flesh. Still flawed." "You're right," she whispered. "But I don't have to hold it alone." And in that moment, she spoke aloud every name she remembered: Saren, Soren, Maribel, Alden, Maeve, Elias, inviting their memories to stand with her. One by one, motes of light appeared around the chamber, echoes of those who had walked the path before her. Not ghosts. Not shadows. Impressions. Flamekeepers passed, forming a silent ring around the archive. The Hollowing shrieked. But it was too late. With one final breath, Illyra slammed the book shut and the chamber exploded in a pulse of golden light, washing everything in radiant memory. When the light faded, she stood alone again. The archive was still. The figure was gone. The book remained, its cover now branded with her name. She picked it up and turned toward the stairs, heart full, flame steady, memory whole. Above her, the Hollowing had fallen quiet. But the world had begun to remember. Illyra emerged from the hollow archive as though rising from the depths of a long-forgotten dream. The spiral staircase, once veiled in shadow, now shimmered faintly with soft gold light, each step glowing under her feet. The book she carried, the Wellsong Codex, as it was now named, was warm in her hands, alive with memory. Its pages, though closed, pulsed gently with every heartbeat. She reached the chamber where the 12 archways stood like silent sentinels. The vaults were quiet now. The names on the walls no longer wept or writhed, they glowed, each one steady and clear, as though history itself had been unburied and invited to speak again. Soren and Saren stood at the entrance of the central hall, eyes wide with a mixture of relief and awe as Illyra stepped into the light. "You're whole," Saren breathed. "You returned." Illyra nodded, too full for words. She crossed the chamber slowly, then held out the codex. Soren stepped forward, gently laying their hand on the book's cover. "I can feel them. All of them. The names, the stories," Illyra said, voice steady. "They're awake now. No longer buried. No longer fed to silence." Saren blinked, as if holding back tears. It's been centuries since anyone stood inside the archive and left with their memory intact. Not just intact, Soren added, gazing at Illyra with quiet reverence. Expanded. You carry the collective voice of the Wellspring. The room shifted subtly around them. The archways that once led to vaults of decay now shimmered with a soft, silver glow. The obsidian monolith in the center had dulled its red veins, now inert, like cooled lava. What happens now? Illyra asked. Soren took a breath. We reseal the hollowing. But not in silence this time. not with forgetting. We seal it with story. With the truth of what it is, and what it tried to take. Saren stepped beside them and drew from her satchel a long, braided cord of silver thread, the same thread once used to protect the stones and the Flamekeepers. "This will close the path," she said. "But it must be bound with the Flamekeeper's vow." Illyra didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, placed the codex at the base of the monolith, and knelt. "I vow," she said, "that memory shall not be hidden in shame. That truth, even painful, must be carried. That the wellspring flows not just through water but through names. Through voices. Through story." She reached into her pack and withdrew the vial of water from the mirror pool. With careful reverence, she poured its contents in a circle around the codex. The water glowed, sealing the circle with the ring of light. Then, lifting her hand, she summoned the ember. It emerged not as fire but as a song. A single, clear note filled the chamber. It echoed through the arches, danced along the shelves of forgotten names, touched the 12 vaults, and whispered into the cracks of the hollowing skate. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The truth never needed volume, only witness. The monolith shuddered. Then, slowly, it fractured, splitting down the middle with a gentle sigh. As it crumbled, the air grew lighter. The mist receded. And from the highest reaches of the hollowing, beams of golden light poured downward, filling every crevice with warmth and remembrance. The great obsidian gate, once sealed to entrap memory, now opened to release it. When they stepped out into the open air, the ravine no longer pulsed with dread. The rope bridge swayed gently in the wind. The statues, once headless, had reformed, now bearing the faces of the original Flamekeepers, their features restored by Illyra's memory. And the forest beyond. It sang. Birds filled the canopy. Sunlight dappled the forest floor. The scars once visible along the path had faded, as if healed by time-given breath. As they made their way back to Raven's Hollow, Illyra could feel the village before she saw it. Not with her eyes, but with her chest, through the ember, through the codex now secured at her side. At the village gates, the people were waiting. Alden stepped forward, his eyes wide. The forest, it's changed. No, Illyra said softly. We changed. She stepped into the square and opened the codex. The book glowed softly, and the villagers gathered close. Children sat at her feet. Elders leaned forward. Even the trees at the edge of the square seemed to lean in, listening. Illyra read aloud the first name. Maeve Thornweaver. First Flamekeeper. Guardian of the Severed Grove. And then the next. Elias Wynn. The Wildfire Tamer. Voice of the Eastern Wind. One by one, she gave back the names that had been stolen. With each name, the village remembered more, not just the legends, but the feeling of belonging to something greater, something rooted in legacy and light. That night, they lit fires not of defense but of celebration. Not of warding but of welcoming. And at the heart of it all stood Illyra Wellsong, bearer of the flame, keeper of the codex, and storyteller of the Wellspring. Not a hero carved in stone, but a voice that remembered what the world tried to forget. And in the sky above, the stars shifted, forming the double spiral of Velora once more, no longer hidden. The Wellspring had returned, and its song had only just begun. The days following the Wellspring festival were filled with hope and renewal. The villagers of Raven's Hollow spoke openly of the Flamekeepers and their forgotten histories. Stories long silenced blossomed anew in hearthside conversations and children's songs. Illyra felt the warmth of belonging pulse through the village like the very ember she carried. Yet beneath this light, something stirred. One evening, as the sun bled crimson behind the hills, Illyra stood at the edge of Eastwood Forest, gazing into the deepening shadows. The codex hung heavy in her satchel, its weight a reminder of the countless memories now awakened and entrusted to her care. Soren appeared silently at her side. The hollowing has been sealed, but the darkness that fed it has not vanished. Illyra nodded. I can feel it, the pulse beneath the earth, like a slow heartbeat waiting to rise. Saren joined them, her eyes darkening. The lost spring was cleansed, but the corruption spread farther than we knew. There are places where the shadows still linger. A sudden gust swept through the trees, carrying a scent of smoke and ash. Illyra's gaze snapped upward. In the distance, thin plumes rose from the forest, twisting against the twilight. Someone or something is burning the outer groves, she whispered. We need to act, Soren said. Together, they hastened toward the source, moving swiftly through the thickening dark. The forest around them seemed alive, branches brushing against their clothes, leaves whispering warnings. Firelight flickered ahead, casting eerie shadows. They arrived to find a group of figures cloaked in black, moving like shadows themselves as they set fire to ancient trees and sacred stones. The flames licked hungrily at the roots, and the air was thick with smoke and despair. Illyra's heart clenched. Why destroy what we fought to save? Saren's eyes narrowed. Because they fear the flames' return. The Hollowing's hunger grows desperate. Soren raised their staff, voice ringing with command. Begone, shadows. You will not claim this forest. The cloaked figures turned, faces hidden beneath hoods, eyes glowing faint red. They hissed and surged forward, their forms shifting into twisted shapes, creatures of smoke and flame, born from the very darkness Illyra had battled. The battle was fierce. Illyra called upon the ember's power, weaving light and warmth through her hands, forming shields and lances of fire. Soren's staff sent waves of verdant energy, and Saren moved with swift grace, binding the dark with silver thread. Amidst the chaos, Illyra saw one figure step apart, their cloak torn, revealing a face strikingly familiar. It was the Watcher, the same woman who had once guarded the spire of morning, now consumed by Shadow's wool. Illyra, the watcher hissed, voice cracked. You carry a fire you cannot control. The hollowing will consume you yet. But Illyra stood firm, the ember burning brighter. I carry the flame not to be consumed, but to light the way. With a final surge, the three guardians unleashed a blast of pure light that scattered the shadows, extinguished the flames, and sealed the breach. As silence returned, Illyra looked to the sky, stars gleaming with renewed clarity. The forest breathed, healing again beneath their watch. The journey was far from over, but the Wellspring's song echoed louder, and Illyra knew she would stand guard, Flamekeeper, storyteller, and protector against whatever darkness dared rise. The flame within her was not just a spark. It was a promise. And she would keep it alive. The weeks following the fiery confrontation at the outer groves passed in a tense rhythm. Raven's Hollow began to heal, but the scar left by the shadowed figures and their destructive fire was a stark reminder that peace was fragile like a candle flickering in a draught. Illyra felt the ember of Velora pulsing steadily within her chest, a steady beacon guiding her through sleepless nights and restless days. Each morning, she walked the village paths, speaking with the elders and the young alike, gathering stories, memories, and hopes. The Well Song Codex had grown heavier with new entries, ancient names, forgotten oaths, and whispered prophecies. The flame within it seemed to resonate with hers, binding the past to the present in a living tapestry. But beneath the surface of everyday life, a deeper tension simmered. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, Illyra sat with Soren and Saren beneath the ancient oaks at the forest's edge. The air was thick with the scent of damp leaves and distant thunder, though no storm had yet broken. The shadows won't rest, Saren said, her voice low and steady. They're regrouping. Their hunger grows. Soren nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon where dark clouds gathered like silent sentinels. And with the flame rekindled, they'll come seeking to snuff it out. Illyra clenched her fists, feeling the ember flare. Then we need to prepare. Not just to defend, but to stand firm. To shine. As the first drops of rain began to fall, a messenger arrived, a rider cloaked in mud and haste. He dismounted quickly, breath ragged. The villages to the east have fallen silent, he reported. Fires, shadows, and whispers of a dark power spreading like a plague. Illyra's heart sank. The hollowing was no longer confined to Eastwood Forest. Its tendrils reached far beyond. We must gather the Flamekeepers, she declared. All those who carry even a spark. Soren drew a map, marking the known locations of guardians and allies scattered throughout the region but connected by threads of memory and loyalty. Saren pulled from her pack a small, glowing crystal. This will call them. A beacon of the Wellspring's light. Illyra held the crystal, feeling its warmth spread through her fingers. She closed her eyes and whispered the ancient chant her grandmother had taught her, the Song of the Flame. The crystal brightened, casting beams of shimmering light into the gathering storm clouds. The air hummed with energy, and from the shadows of the forest, Figures began to emerge hooded, cloaked, but unmistakably marked by the silver thread and the ember's glow. They came in silence, one by one, until the clearing was filled with a circle of flamekeepers, each bearing their own unique light. Some held staffs carved with ancient runes, others bore blades kissed by fire, all shared the fierce determination that burned in Illyra's own heart. Alden stepped forward, raising his voice above the rising wind. Tonight, we stand not as individuals, but as a covenant. To protect the Wellspring, to carry its memory, and to face the storm that comes. Illyra looked around at the gathered faces, the young and the old, the weary and the resolute. She felt the ember within her swell, feeding on their courage. "We will face the hollowing together," she said. "Not with fear, but with flame. With memory. With hope." Thunder rumbled, and lightning split the sky, but the circle held fast, light against darkness, song against silence. And as the storm broke over Raven's Hollow, Illyra knew the true test was only just beginning. The flame in her chest was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. And she was ready to answer. The storm that swept over Raven's Hollow was unlike any the village had seen in living memory. It roared in from the north, a tempest born of shadow and fury, tearing through the ancient trees of Eastwood Forest with merciless intent. Illyra stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by the circle of flamekeepers she had gathered. Each face was set with determination, eyes reflecting the wild dance of lightning that fractured the darkened sky. "This is it," Illyra said, her voice steady though her heart hammered within her chest. "The Hollowing's true assault." The earth trembled beneath their feet as the first wave of shadow creatures spilled from the forest like a tide of smoke and ash. They were twisted beings, embodiments of lost memories and broken oaths, their forms shifting and pulsing with malevolent energy. Their eyes burned with an unnatural light, and their claws tore at the earth as they advanced. Sauron raised their staff, its crystal tip blazing with verdant light. "Hold the line," they commanded. "Protect the Wellspring." Illyra closed her eyes, feeling the ember within her surge. She reached deep into its warmth, pulling forth a radiant flame that wove around her hands like living silk. With a cry, she sent the fire spiraling into the approaching shadows. The creatures hissed and recoiled, their forms unraveling in the heat. Sauron moved with swift grace, casting silver thread traps that shimmered and ensnared the dark shapes, binding them until they dissolved into mist. The other flamekeepers joined the fray, their weapons ignited by Illyra's light blades that sang with fire, arrows that burned with memory. Amidst the chaos, Illyra felt a sharp tug at her consciousness. The ember pulsed fiercely, guiding her gaze toward the heart of the storm where a massive shadow loomed, an ancient entity, the source of the Hollowing's corruption. Its form was a swirling vortex of darkness, crowned with horns of twisted wood and eyes like voids. The entity's voice echoed in Illyra's mind, "You cannot extinguish what was born of forgetting." Illyra stepped forward, unafraid. "I don't seek to extinguish," she replied, voice clear and unwavering. "I seek to remember. To restore what was lost." The Hollowing surged, sending waves of despair crashing against the circle. The Flamekeepers struggled to hold their ground as the dark storm threatened to consume them. Drawing strength from the codex, Illyra lifted her hands high. The pages glowed, releasing a cascade of golden light that rained down upon the battlefield. The names and stories contained within the book poured forth as a luminous tide, washing over the shadows and weakening their grasp. The ancient entity roared, a sound that shook the very sky, and lunged toward Illyra. She met its assault with a shield of flame, the ember within her flaring into a brilliant blaze. Their energies collided, light against darkness, memory against oblivion. Time seemed to slow. In that suspended moment, Illyra remembered the faces of those who had come before the Flamekeepers, who had sacrificed everything to protect the Wellspring. She felt their strength flow into her, weaving a tapestry of courage and hope. With a final, resolute cry, she channeled the full power of the ember, unleashing a wave of radiant fire that engulfed the entity. The darkness writhed and screamed but could not withstand the purity of remembrance. Slowly, the shadow dissolved into nothingness, leaving the sky clear and the forest still. The battle was won, but at a cost. The village lay scarred, the forest battered. Yet the Wellspring's song had endured, carried forward by those who remembered. Illyra stood among her fellow Flamekeepers, her heart heavy but proud. The ember within her pulsed gently, a reminder of the journey yet to come. As dawn broke over Raven's Hollow, painting the world anew, Illyra knew this was not the end but the beginning of a legacy that would burn bright for generations. And she was ready to carry the flame forward, no matter the storm. The dawn after the storm cast soft golden light across Raven's Hollow, illuminating the scars left by the battle, the fallen trees, the charred earth, and the weary faces of villagers who had witnessed the darkness up close. Yet, amidst the ruin, a quiet strength blossomed, carried by the whispers of the Wellspring's song. Illyra walked through the village, her steps steady despite the exhaustion that clung to her bones. The ember of Velora pulsed warmly within her chest, a beacon of hope that refused to flicker out. She greeted the villagers, their eyes filled with gratitude and newfound resolve. At the village square, Alden stood before a gathering crowd. His voice, though aged, carried with unwavering conviction as he spoke of the trials overcome and the future to be forged. Illyra joined him, feeling the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on her shoulders. "The Wellspring has returned to us," Alden declared. "Not just as a source of water or magic, but as a living memory, a bond that connects us all to the past and to each other. It is our duty to protect this legacy, to nurture it so that it may guide us through whatever storms lie ahead." Illyra raised the Well Song Codex for all to see. This book contains the stories of our ancestors, the Flamekeepers who came before us. Their memories are our strength, their courage our light. Together, we will continue their work, guardians of the flame, keepers of the song. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices weaving into a harmonious chorus that seemed to echo through the trees and into the sky. Children danced, elders smiled, and the village seemed to breathe anew. In the days that followed, Illyra and the Flamekeepers began to rebuild. They restored the sacred groves, tended to the wounded forest, and rekindled the ancient rites that honored the Wellspring. Under Illyra's guidance, the village embraced a new era, one of remembrance, unity, and resilience. But Illyra knew the journey was far from over. The Hollowing's shadow still lingered in distant places, and the legacy she carried demanded vigilance and courage. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in hues of amber and rose, Illyra stood atop a hill overlooking Raven's Hollow. The stars emerged, shimmering like scattered embers across the velvet sky. She placed her hand over her heart, feeling the steady pulse of the flame within. Whispering the ancient words of her oath, she vowed once more to protect the Wellspring's song, to carry its light through darkness, and to ensure that its legacy would never be forgotten. The wind stirred the trees around her, carrying with it the softest echo of a melody, the Wellspring's song, rekindled and eternal. And Illyra smiled, ready for whatever the future held. As the seasons shifted and the fires of the Wellspring festival dwindled into cherished memories, a new tension quietly threaded through Ravenshallow's tranquil days. Illyra felt it deep within the embers, pulse an undercurrent of unease whispering beneath the village's restored harmony. One mist-laden morning, she awoke to find the forest cloaked in a heavy silence. The usual chorus of birdsong was absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that pressed against her senses. She dressed swiftly, gathering the codex and her cloak, and made her way to the village square where Soren and Saren awaited. "The Hollowing's shadow lingers," Soren murmured, eyes scanning the darkened tree-line. "The storm was only the beginning." Saren added, her voice low, "There are places even the well song cannot reach, thresholds between worlds where the lost memories gather. The veil grows thin." Illyra's gaze hardened. "Then we must follow the whispers beyond the veil." Together, they set forth toward the ancient ruins beyond Eastwood Forest, remnants of a forgotten age where the barrier between the living and the unseen was said to be thinnest. The journey was arduous, the terrain wild and tangled, but their resolve burned bright. As twilight fell, they arrived at a circle of standing stones bathed in ethereal moonlight. The air shimmered with unseen energy, and the space felt alive with murmurs of the past. Illyra stepped into the circle, the ember in her chest flaring warmly. She opened the codex to a passage marked by a silver thread, a ritual to cross the veil and seek the lost echoes. With Soren and Saren at her side, she began the chant, her voice weaving through the cold night air, calling upon the flame's memory to guide and protect. Slowly, the world around them blurred and shifted, colors melting into shadows and light. They found themselves standing at the threshold of a realm woven from dreams and forgotten stories, a liminal space where time folded and the past whispered secrets long buried. Here, Illyra faced visions of ancestors and choices, paths that could alter the fate of Raven's Hollow and the Wellspring itself. The veil tested her, probing her heart and purpose. Drawing strength from the flame and the codex, Illyra confronted the deepest shadows, weaving the well zone's light into a beacon that would heal the fractures between worlds. As dawn broke, they returned to the waking realm, changed, strengthened, and bound more tightly to the legacy they were sworn to protect. Illyra knew this journey beyond the veil was but one of many yet to come. But with each step, the Wellspring song grew clearer, a melody of hope, remembrance, and eternal light. In the days after their journey beyond the veil, Illyra found the world subtly altered, as if the thin membrane between reality and memory had been stretched taut, ready to snap. The village of Ravens Hollow carried itself with a newfound reverence, the Wellspring song humming in the air like a gentle promise. Yet, despite the light restored, shadows lingered not just in the forest but in hearts and histories left unspoken. Illyra often returned to the glade where the veil had parted, feeling the ember pulse in tune with the whispered echoes. She spent long hours poring over the codex, seeking guidance in the ancient texts that had unfolded before her. One evening, as twilight bled into night, a soft knock came at her door. Standing there was a woman cloaked in midnight blue, eyes reflecting the flicker of candlelight. "I am Lysera," she said softly. "A keeper of forgotten paths." Illyra welcomed her inside, heart quickening with the recognition of a kindred spirit. Lysera spoke of distant realms, places where memories coalesced into beings of light and shadow, where the Wellspring song was both shield and beacon. She revealed that the veil's thinning was not accidental but stirred by forces seeking to rewrite history itself. "The hollowing is but one fracture," Lysera warned. "Others stir beyond the horizon, waiting to unravel the fabric of memory and hope." Together, they devised a plan to journey to the lost sanctuaries scattered across the land, to mend the broken chords of the Wellspring's melody, and to forge alliances with other guardians who still carried fragments of the flame. Illyra felt the weight of destiny anew, but also the spark of possibility. With Lysera by her side, the circle of Flamekeepers grew, their songs intertwining like threads in a tapestry destined to withstand even the fiercest storm. As dawn broke over Ravens Hollow, Illyra stood once more at the forest's edge, ember glowing steady and bright. The journey ahead was vast and uncertain, but the Wellspring song would never fade. And neither would she. As Illyra and Lysera set out beyond Ravens Hollow, the horizon stretched wide with promise and peril. Their path led through forgotten valleys and ancient ruins, where the echoes of past Flamekeepers whispered in the winds. Along the way, they found others, keepers of scattered embers, guardians of secret wellsprings, each bearing a shard of the flame's legacy. Together, they forged a fellowship united by memory and hope. They shared stories, songs, and secrets, weaving a network of light to push back the darkness threatening to unravel the world's fabric. The Wellsong Codex grew heavier with new pages, its glow brighter with each bond formed. Illyra felt her own ember blazing stronger, fueled by the courage and faith of those around her. Though shadows still lurked in hidden corners, the growing light promised a dawn that no night could deny. Chapter 20, The Wellspring's Song. The final battle came beneath a sky thick with swirling stars and thunderous clouds. The Hollowing's last remnant rose, a tempest of shadow and forgetfulness, seeking to silence the flame forever. But Illyra stood at its center, the Wellsong Codex opened before her, and the gathered Flamekeepers singing the ancient song of remembrance. Their voices rang out a chorus of past and present, binding memory with magic, love with legacy. The tempest faltered, then shattered beneath the tide of light. Peace settled over the land like a gentle rain. Ravens Hollow bloomed anew, its rivers clear, its forests vibrant, and its people united by a story that would never fade. Illyra, Flamekeeper, and Storyteller, stood among her people, the ember in her chest a steady, warm glow. She smiled, knowing the Wellspring song would live on, carried by hearts brave enough to remember, and strong enough to hope. Tu de chin cho ton bo tru yen. The Wellspring Legacy, the Flamekeeper's Journey. Amo ta tong quan. In the quiet village of Raven's Hollow, an ancient legacy awakens. Illyra Wellsong, a young woman chosen by the Ember of Velora, embarks on a perilous quest to reclaim the forgotten memories of the Flamekeepers and protect the Wellspring's song, a source of life, magic, and hope. Through shadowed forests, haunted ruins, and realms beyond the veil, Illyra must confront darkness both old and new, uniting scattered guardians and weaving a tapestry of remembrance that will shine against the deepest night. This epic fantasy journey explores the power of memory, legacy, and the courage to carry the flame forward.